Hello guys, we're back again with another tutorial, and this time it's the inductive logical thinking test. This is the test where you have to discover rules and identify the odd object. And that is because we have had several requests asking us to make this tutorial. So, if you have any requests or want any particular type of test covered, then please get in touch and we'll get right onto it. We see all the comments on the videos, or you can reach us directly on our email address. In this tutorial, we are going to show you how to do well in this type of assessment by first going over a general background of these kind of tests and explaining their purpose. Then we'll go through the core concept and show you how to solve the questions quickly and accurately. We'll then go through some examples explaining the rationale of getting to the solutions, and there will be tips and tricks along the way showing you how to get to the right answers more efficiently, saving you valuable seconds. And finally, we'll share resources with you through a 4-step action plan, including a practice e-booklet which has over 100 practice questions and answers thoroughly explained, which will certainly help you ace your assessment. But before we get started, please subscribe to our channel. It really helps us with the algorithm and allows our tutorials to reach more people, meaning more people can succeed in these assessments. We have many more videos lined up to be uploaded, so don't forget to hit the bell button so you get notified whenever we post a video and you don't miss out. Okay, this type of assessment is designed to measure your ability to think logically and thus assess your inductive reasoning. That is your aptitude to look at a group of items, observe common patterns or interrelationships in order to identify discrepancies and draw logical conclusions. Or, in simple terms, the ability to discover rules. This ultimately indicates your non-verbal reasoning thinking skills and provides an insight into your way of thinking or induction of information and approach when presented with new situations. Such competencies are necessary for a wide range of jobs, including project managers, technical support engineers, lawyers, cabin crew, programmers, communication officers, and so on. It is important for companies to be aware of these competencies as it helps them make hiring decisions. These tests are extremely popular as they are entirely international. No language barrier exists as it is purely symbolic. You will have 5 minutes to work through 20 tasks of varying difficulty categories. You will be assessed on how many questions you are able to complete in the default time and how many of those questions you answer correctly or accurately. In other words, in order to do well, both speed and accuracy are important. Your scores are then compared with the scores of other participants for grading. The 20 tasks are presented in increasing levels of difficulty. The optimal way to complete this assessment is to complete as many questions as possible as accurately as possible. You are penalized for wrong answers, and so try to avoid guessing. Most people are not able to answer all 20 tasks within the given 5 minutes time frame. But once you've watched through this tutorial and completed the practice e-booklet, which has more than 100 questions, complete with solutions and explanations, we are sure you will not only be able to complete all 20 questions, but also answer them accurately and confidently pass the test. There will not be any need to guess. Finally, improving the capability of inductive logical reasoning is not easy. Recognizing and understanding rules and relations is a complex cognitive process The best way to maximize potential is by training your cognitive abilities by practicing as many questions as possible. Learn how to discover rules quickly and effectively and pass any Scales IX test by using our Practice E booklet. Alright, the key principle is very straightforward. For each question, you are presented with 9 objects containing shapes, symbols, lines, and so on, as you can see here. All of which comply with a governing rule except for one. And you have to determine which is the one that doesn't comply with the governing rule and the one that's out of place and shouldn't be there. Or simply put, which is the odd one out. The way to determine which object does not fit the rule is to first determine the common pattern or rule between the objects. The patterns are usually one of or a combination of the following: rotation, alternation, translation, reflection, replacement, progression, repetition, position, combination, and so on. In the task shown here, for example, we have different shades, different shapes, different sizes, different placements and positioning. And sometimes you'll find that most of these characteristics, patterns or rules are just distractions. Sometimes they are very random, sometimes they are actual patterns, but all the objects follow the rule and so they don't lead you to the correct answer. But by the end of this tutorial, you will be able to quickly determine what is a distraction so that you can ignore them and quickly get to the right answer. If you think you have come up with a pattern, check it applies to every item in the sequence before committing to an answer. 8 of the objects follow the same rule, and there is only one object that is wrong and needs to be discovered. In other words, there is only one solution or correct answer for every question. In some cases, the answer will jump out at you immediately, and the more practice you have, the more likely this will happen. In other cases, it may be a little more difficult, so it is critical to pay attention to the details. In either case, follow the 5-step process that we have outlined here, and you will always be on the right track. We'll quickly go through what that is, and then we'll jump into some real examples, putting this 5-step process into practice. Start with a quick glance, quickly checking all 9 objects, and make a mental note of which shapes or lines or sizes or symbols are in question, or what different transformations you see across the 9 objects. So for example, think about the shapes that you see, the sizes, the different shades, the directions, the quantity, intersections, the placements or the positioning. In this case, for example, we only have to consider the shape and we see repetition. Sometimes the odd one out immediately sticks out, like we have here, in which case you already have the answer. However, when it's not so obvious, then have a look at the second object. How is it different from the first object? Then do the same for the third object against the second object. And keep doing this until you determine a pattern. Ideally, use the first few objects to determine a pattern and then test your theory by checking it fits with the remaining objects. If, however, you still can't identify the pattern, then do the same thing in reverse. And by that, we mean start at the last object on the right and compare it to the second last object, and so on and so forth until you determine the rule. Once you determine the pattern, you can identify which one object doesn't comply and get to your answer. There is no need to complete all 5 steps of this process every single time. It is only designed to guide you and not to slow you down. So, if you get to your answer after the first step, if you are sure there is no need to continue with the steps, you can choose your answer and move to the next task. It may initially seem like a lot of steps and a very long process, but all this can be done in a matter of seconds. And the more practice you have, the more second nature it will become, and the quicker you'll get through it. You should try to avoid guessing as much as possible. However, if you are unsure of the answer and have been stuck for a while, then choose the answer that seems most right for you if you are fairly confident and move on. Otherwise, move on and come back to the task at the end if you still have some time. So, without further ado, let's go through some examples to show you what we mean and put all of this into practice. These examples are all taken from actual tests, so we'll give you a very good idea of what to expect in your assessment. So here's the first question from the examples, and what we have done is we have listed the 5-step process below for reference to guide us through the first few questions until we get the hang of it, and then we will try to do it without the list. So the first thing I'll do when I come across this question is have a quick glance across all 9 objects, and what I see immediately is that there are only shapes that are being considered here. And my immediate observations are that there are only 2 different shapes, squares and circles, and there are no shades, no colors, they're all the same size, there's no different positioning, so essentially nothing else to consider other than the 2 shapes. So now what I will do is, now that I've had a quick glance and I have an understanding of what to expect, I can now compare. So remember, I'll compare the second shape versus the first, and we see that we have gone from square to a circle. And then I'll do the same for the third versus the second object. So we've now gone from a circle to a square. And then again, once more, I can see that we've gone from the square to a circle. And by this point, it's become clear to us that the rule or the pattern is alternating between a square and a circle, square, circle, and so on. So we've identified the pattern. So essentially, there's no need to do number 4. There's no need to go in reverse because we've already identified what we believe to be the pattern. And so we can go immediately into identifying the odd one out, or the one that doesn't fit in. So let's start from the beginning and then go through the pattern. So remember, it's alternating between square and circle. So square, circle, square, circle, square, circle. So this one should be a square if our rule is correct. Square, and then just to confirm, we can continue on. So if this one should be a square, then this should be a circle and then square. So you can see that the object that doesn't fit in is this one right here. So this is our answer. So we would answer here. Of course, I could have given the answer immediately, but what we are trying to do here is explain the entire process so that when you are faced with a more challenging task, you have a guideline of what to do and you won't find yourself stuck. So let's move on to the next question. And again, we start off with a quick glance across the 9 objects to see what we are going to be working with for this question. And what we can clearly see immediately is we have different shades and different shapes across the 9 objects. These are the 2 key elements that we need to consider when we are trying to determine our pattern. So let's move on to the next step in the process, which is to compare. And if you remember, we need to compare the second shape versus the first shape, and then we will compare the third shape versus the second shape, and so on and so forth until we determine a pattern. So what we are going to do is we can see that we are moving from a gray diamond shape, or what is also known as a rhombus. So from a gray rhombus to a white rhombus, a black rhombus, then a gray rhombus, then a black rhombus, then a white rhombus, and then another white rhombus. Then we have a white square, and then we have a gray rhombus. So what we have determined from what we've just done is that we have only one square amongst all the other rhombus. So this means essentially that the pattern is actually determined by the shape and not the shading. So when we first looked at this, it seemed like that the shading, i.e. the gray, the white, or the black, was going to determine our pattern. But in reality, the pattern was determined by the shape. And so the shading, the gray, the white, and the black, was just there merely as a distraction. So it was, the shading is used to distract us and to make it more difficult for us to reach the answer. So we have the pattern. There's no need to do the reverse, and we've already identified the odd one out. And like we said, we have the one square amongst all the different rhombus shapes, and so our odd one out, or the one that doesn't fit the rule, is of course the square. So this is the seventh object here. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, question 3. As always, we'll start with a quick glance, and we can see from the objects that there are different shapes, different sizes, different positioning, but the one thing we can say is that the shapes seem very random. So they are unlikely to be what's going to determine the pattern. So let's start by focusing on the size and positioning. What we can also see is that every single object has two shapes. So quantity is not going to determine the pattern or the rule. Ultimately, what we see is that we have in every object two shapes, one of them smaller and one of them larger. So we have a large shape and a small shape in every object. So that is the same for every object, so that's not going to give us any difference or any patterns here. So most likely it will be the positioning of the shapes that will determine the rule. So let's move on to the second part of the 5-step process, and that is to compare. Remember, we need to compare the second shape versus the first shape. Then we compare the third shape versus the second shape, and so on and so forth. And what we see in the first shape is that we have two shapes where they are outside of each other. Then on the second shape, however, we have the smaller shape inside the larger shape. On the third object, we again have the two shapes outside of each other, and then on the fourth, the same. So here we have, from the first 4 objects, we have 3 of these shapes or objects where we have a smaller shape outside of the larger shape, and only one with the smaller shape inside. So this already is giving us some indications that the rule may be that you have a larger object and then a smaller object outside. But we can continue just to make sure. So you can see in the 5th object, to validate the rule, you can see in the 5th object you again have a larger shape and a smaller shape outside of each other. 6th object, same thing, the smaller shape is outside of the larger shape, and the same goes for the 7th, 8th, and 9th object, where you have the shapes outside of each other. So We have determined the pattern here already, and so there's no need to go in reverse. And finally, we've already, as a result of identifying the pattern, determined the odd one out, or the one that doesn't fit in, which is this one here, the second object, because this is the only one where the smaller shape is inside the larger shape, whereas in every other object, the two shapes are outside of each other. Moving on to question 4. Let's again start off with a quick glance, and immediately what we can see, or what we observe, is that there is only one shape, and that is the plus sign. However, what is changing throughout the objects is the quantity and the positioning of this one shape, or the plus sign. The positioning seems to be quite random in respect to one another. So let's focus on the quantity. So now we move on to the second part of the 5-step process, which is to compare. So let's start by comparing. Usually we would start off from the left. So we will compare the second object versus the first, and so on and so forth. But because here we can see that the quantity on the right hand side is much less than it is on the left hand side, then it might be quicker or easier to start from the right, or we do the reverse comparison. So we start from the right and we work our way to the left. Just because the number is less, it's going to be quicker to try and identify the rule this way. So let's start with the last shape. We can see we have one plus sign, and then we move on to the second one, and we have 2 plus signs, and then we move on to the third one from the right, or the third object from the right, and what we see is we have 3 plus signs or crosses, and then on to the next one, and what we have is 4 plus signs or crosses. So the rule or the pattern seems to be quite clear. So if we start from the right and move towards the left, we can see that the number of plus signs or crosses are increasing by 1 each time. So 1 cross, 2 crosses, 3 crosses, 4 crosses, and so on and so forth. So now that we've identified the rule, or what we believe to be the rule, we just need to continue going on and try to identify which is the odd one out. So 1, 2 crosses, 3 crosses, 4 crosses, 5 crosses, 6 crosses. So you can see this one should be 5 crosses, but if you add the number of crosses, there seems to be 6. But let's keep going just to make sure that is indeed the rule, and this is indeed the one that is the odd one out. So this one should be 5, so this one is 6, which is correct. We have 6 crosses. This one should be 7 and is again correct because we have 7 crosses. This one should be 8, and finally the last one, or the one on the left, or the object on the left, should have 9 plus signs or crosses. And so our pattern is indeed right, and our odd one out it will indeed be this number 5 object, which shows 6 crosses instead of 5. So for question number 5, what we'll do here is give you the opportunity to see if you can find the answer yourself, and we'll give you around 10 seconds to see if you can do that. So use the 5-step process to guide you, and if you need more time, of course, you can pause the video. Once you believe you have the solution, please leave your answers in the description below and let us know how quickly you are able to get it. So for question 6, we're going to go through the 5-step process, but you're going to see how we're able to do it subconsciously. And let's get straight into it. So what we will do initially is have a quick glance And what we can see is that, of course, there are only the circles to be considered. And you can consider these like dice. Usually they will have between 1 and 6 circles in different positions. So what we need to do is identify the pattern, of course, and we do that by comparing the different objects. So if we just say out loud what we can see, this may help us get to the answer. 1, 4 circles, 2 circles, 1 circle, 4 circles, 2 circles, 1 circle, 4 circles, 5 circles. So what we have seen here is that there seems to be a clear pattern. So if we write it down, 1, 4, 2, 1. Actually, let me use a different color for this. So you see 1, 4, 2, and then 1, 4, 5. I think the answer is already clear, but just to make sure, you can see the pattern is 1, 4, 2, 1, 4, 2, and then 1, 4, and this one should be 2 circles, but you have 5. So we've identified the pattern, which is repetitive 1, 4, 2, or in a sequence, but this one is out of line or out of place, and it should actually be a 2 instead of a 5. Let's start moving through these questions a little bit quicker. So question 7, we start off by having a quick glance and looking at the objects to understand what's being assessed, or the elements. And you can see that every single object has essentially 2 lines. Some of them are more squiggly than others. And you can also see that the lengths vary slightly. But something that's even more peculiar is that in all of the objects, apart from one that you can see, the lines do not cross each other. And only on one of them, which this object here, do you see that the lines intersect or cross each other. So this immediately tells us that the shapes of the lines, the lengths of the lines, the amount of squiggliness to the lines is all a distraction. And in fact, our answer is this one, because this is the one that breaches the rule, which we have seen here, is that the 2 lines should not cross each other or do not intersect. So this is your answer. Can you get the answer to this one? Question number 8, we're going to give you 10 seconds again to see if you can get the correct answer. If you do, please let us know the answer, the solution in the comments. And also, if you're not able to get it, please let us know and we will help you. Of course, if you need more time, please pause the video. So for question number 9, what we can do is we will start off by counting the number of shapes in each object. So you can see here we have 1, 2, 3, then we have 4, then we have 5, and then we have 5 again. So already this is like a red flag. Then we have 3, then we have 2, and finally we have 1. So if you remember, as we were going through it, we immediately noticed that this one kind of went against the momentum. So we were increasing from 1 initially in the first object, and it was increasing by 1 each time. So it was going 1, 2, 3, then 4 shapes, then 5 shapes. Then we were expecting this to be a 6, but when we continue on, we see that this is a 3, 2, and 1. So the correct answer, or if this was following the rule, this one should have actually been 4, which basically means the rule was for the number of shapes to increase by 1 each time until we reached this 5th object, and then the number of shapes reduces by 1 each time. So then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what we know is that this is the object that doesn't fit the rule, and we also know that it should have been 4 shapes inside the object, not 5. Don't pay too much attention to the different shapes or the split between circles and squares in each object. This seems to be quite random and it's only there to distract you. So focus on the quantity rather than of the individual shapes itself for this one. Question number 10. We have a quick glance, and what we immediately see or notice is that each object has 5 lines, and one of these lines has a split or a gap in between. And then when we compare the different objects, we see that this line with the gap goes up 1 level here from the first to the second, and then from the second to the third it again goes up 1 level, and you can see here now line number 3. And then on this one, it goes up another level. So object number 4, the line with the gap is in line number 4 from the bottom. And then on this one, the 5th object, the line with the gap has gone up again by 1 to level 5 or line 5. And then the reverse starts to happen. And so that line with the gap starts to go down by 1 each time. So you can see it's gone down here again by 1. And then again by 1, and then again by 1, and then here you would expect the line with the gap to be right on the bottom, but it's at the top. So this tells us that this is the object that doesn't fit the rule. We know that the line with the gap should continue to decrease by 1 level, and so it should have been at the bottom. So this is your answer. On question 11, our quick glance immediately tells us that there is only one shape. There are no shades, there are no different sizes. The only thing that is changing is the direction or the position that it's facing, this T shape, we can call it. So here you can see on the first object it's facing up, then on the second object is facing to the right, and then on the third object it is facing down, and the fourth object is facing to the right again. So now instead of continuing on like this, we need to try and understand what's the relationship between the second object and the first object, or what has happened to the shape. So the shape has rotated 90 degrees clockwise from the first object to the second object. And then if we do the same thing onto the third shape, we can see again that the shape or the T shape has rotated clockwise 90 degrees again. So this already gives us an indication that this is probably our rule, is the 90 degrees rotation clockwise. But then when we reach the fourth shape, it has again rotated 90 degrees, but this time it's anti-clockwise rather than clockwise. So this already brings our attention to this potentially being the odd one out, or the one that doesn't fit the rule. So then if we continue on the rule and imagine that this should have continued 90 degrees clockwise rotation, so the T would have been facing to the left, the correct one, so we should have a shape that looks like this over here. And then if this shape rotates 90 degrees clockwise, then it will be pointing upwards like this. So that is following the rule so far. Then again 90 degrees clockwise, and then so on and so forth. If you continue on, you will see that the shape continues to rotate 90 degrees clockwise. So this tells us that this indeed is our object that doesn't fit the rule, and so this is our answer, because the T shape is facing to the right, as you can see here, instead of towards the left if it had continued to follow the rule of 90 degrees clockwise. So this is our answer. On question number 12, what we see is that we have the same object pretty much across the board, across the 9 objects, where there is only one thing that is changing, and that is the position of the black dot. So every single one has one black dot, and then it's only the position of the black dot that is changing from one object to the other. So let's follow and see what's happening with this black object when we go from the first object to the second object. So what we can see is that the black object is moving one space clockwise. So the black dot is moving one space clockwise from here to here, from the first shape to the second shape. Then when we go from the second shape to the third shape, again, the black dot moves one space clockwise, and then again from the third to the fourth, where the black dot has moved one space clockwise. So this already is giving us indications that this is potentially the rule, but let's continue on to see. So from the fourth to the fifth shape, if we have the correct rule, we expect the black dot to be over here. This should be our black dot, but what we actually see is that it's over here. So this already highlights that this potentially could be our odd object, or the one that doesn't fit the rule. And then if we continue on, just to make sure that our theory or our rule is indeed correct. So if the black dot was here, then one space clockwise brings it over here. So this one is correct. And then if we continue, we see that the black dot just continues to move one space clockwise each time. So on this object is here. On this object, again, it's moved one space clockwise, and same thing for the last object. And so this tells us that this indeed is our object that doesn't fit the rule, and this is our answer. For question number 13, we can see that we have only, from a quick glance, we can see that we only have two different shapes. So let's see what's happening from one object to the other. Immediately I can already see the answer, and I can tell you that the one that doesn't fit the rule is this one over here. But let's just go through the theory, or let's just go through how we were able to work this out quickly. Basically what we saw is that there are only two different shapes, and those two different shapes are the square and the circle. And what we see is that from one object to the other, it's just alternating between a square and a circle. So first object square, then circle, square, circle, square, then a circle, then a square, then a circle, and of course the last one should have been a square, but it is a circle, or it's showing as a circle, and so this is why it's the wrong, or why it's the right answer, but it's the wrong shape. It should have been a square. So the rule is alternating between square and circle. Moving on to question number 14, just from the quick glance, I can already tell you that this third object is going to be our answer. And that is because when I had my quick glance, what I saw is that every single object has two shapes. The shapes are not necessarily important, or which shapes they are, or the specific shapes are not very important, as they seem to be quite random. But what we also notice is that the larger of those two shapes is shaded in black, whilst the smaller shape is white. And this is true for every single object, all 9 objects. So it's true that there is a pattern, but there aren't any of these objects that disobey that rule if all of the objects are in line with that pattern. So this is not the pattern we're interested in. Instead, what we see is that in all the objects, apart from the one that we've already circled, you see that the smaller white shaded or the white shape is sitting outside of the larger black shaded shape, apart from this one where the smaller white shaded, or the smaller white shape is inside the larger black shaded shape. So as you can see, this rule is true for all of the objects apart from this one, third object. So this is our answer. On question number 15, again, we're going to give you the opportunity to see if you're able to answer the question, and use everything you've learned so far to see if you can answer it. Again, you will have 10 seconds. Of course, if you need more time, please pause the video until you're able to get the answer. Let us know in the description, in the comment section, sorry, how long it took you, whether you were able to get it, or if you need more help to get to the right answer. Then let's go on to question number 16, and let's have our quick glance. And then from our quick glance, we can immediately see something that sticks out, and you can see that this object, the third one from the end or from the right, this object is clearly very different to all the other objects, and you can already say that this is going to be our answer. And essentially the rule is that there are 4 circles in each object, and it doesn't matter what shading they are. So the shading or the color of the circles is just a distraction. The rule is that there should be 4 circles, and of course this one doesn't have that. So this is our answer. So on question number 17, just from our quick glance, I can already tell you that the answer should be this one over here. And that is because if you have a look, in every single object, you have a larger shape with a smaller shape inside, larger shape with a smaller shape inside. All of them follow this rule apart from this one. So this already, or this immediately drew my attention to it because it was the only one that has the smaller shape outside of the larger shape. There are other things you may have been drawn to or you could have considered, and that is the shading. And you can see that for the larger shape, it alternates between black and white. So here you have a black on the first shape, larger shape, and then you have a white larger shape on the second object. And then it's a black larger shape, and so on and so forth. So if you continue this trend, you can see black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white, black. So you can see there's all of the objects follow that rule. And then if you look at the smaller one, or the smaller shape in each object, again, that alternates between white and black in the reverse order. So it starts off as white, and then it goes on to the black, then white, black, white, black, white, black, and white. So you can see, again, all of the objects follow that rule, and so neither of these two rules or patterns will help you or get you closer to the answer. They are just there to distract you. And of course, like we said, our answer is indeed this one. On question number 18, let's have a look or our quick glance, and what we can see is that every single object has the 5 lines again, with one of them having a gap. Actually, this one doesn't have a gap. So already what we can say is that this is going to be our answer, this one here, because it is the only one that doesn't have a line with a gap. So initially we may have thought that we need to see what's happening between this one and this one. You can see that the line with the gap goes up by 1 level here, then it goes up by 2 levels on the third object, and then it comes down 4 levels on the fourth object. So you can see that the positioning of the line with the gap is very random. So the positioning of that line is just used to distract us. And if we were not paying attention to the details, we may have missed this object without not having a line with a gap. And so we would have spent the time trying to see the positioning of the line with a gap. But in reality, we were able to get the answer immediately just by noticing that this one does not have a line with a gap. And so this is our answer. On question 19, this one is pretty straightforward. We can see from our quick glance that the rule or the pattern is quite clear, and that it's a repetition of the square, and it should be a square. So the only one that does not follow that pattern is object number 3, which shows a triangle instead of a square. So this is going to be our answer. It's pretty straightforward. So for question number 20, again, our quick glance, we have to look at each of the objects, and what we can see is that I can tell you immediately that this should be our answer. Again, we've seen similar types of questions where you have 2 shapes in every single object. The shapes themselves are not really that important. They seem to be quite random, but what is important is the placement of the smaller shape in relation to the larger shape. And what you can see is in all of the objects apart from this one, the smaller shape is placed outside of the larger shape apart from this one. So this is the one that doesn't follow the rule, and therefore this is our answer. On question 21, we're gonna give you again 10 seconds to see if you can get the answer. Please leave your answers in the comment section and let us know how long it took you, or if you're not able to get the answer, please also let us know and we will help you get to the right answer. For question number 22, once we have our quick glance, it's quite straightforward to see what's changing. What we can see is that every single object, or all 9 objects, have 4 circles and they're all placed in the same position. So the only thing you can see that is changing is the color or the shading. And so we can concentrate on that when we are trying to get to the answer. And by looking at the first few objects, you can see that we go from black circles to white circles to black circles, and you can kind of assume that the pattern is going to be that the shading or the color will alternate between black and white. So if we continue from black, then it should be white circles, then black, then white, then black, then white, then black, which means this one here in the middle will be the odd one out, or the one that doesn't fit the rule, because this should be black circles if the pattern was going to continue correctly. So black, white, black, white, black, white, and here instead of black you have the white. So this is our answer. Question number 23 is very straightforward. As soon as you have your glance, or as soon as you look at it, you can already see one that sticks out, and that is the square amongst all the circles. So immediately you have your answer. There's no need to do any further analysis. So this is your answer. For question 24, let's see how quickly you can get that. Again, we will give you 10 seconds to try and get the answer. Please let us know in the comments which is your correct answer and how quickly you are able to do it. And if you're not able to do it, also let us know and we will help you with the solution. So question number 25, this one looks quite similar to one we've done previously, but always answer each question independent of any other answers that you've done. Sometimes they may be similar, sometimes they look similar, but they're completely different in terms of the pattern. So let's just go through this. From our quick glance, we see that we have 2 shapes, sometimes only 1 shape appearing in the object, and the number of objects seems to be increasing and decreasing. So let's just count the number of shapes within each object and then see if that gives us an indication. So for this one, you can see, or the first object you see, you have 1 shape, the second one you have 2, the third one you have 3, then you have 4, then you have 4 again. So already we have a potential solution or answer, because this already doesn't look right, but let's continue. So again we have another 4, and then we have 3, then we have 2, then lastly 1. So if you look at this, you can kind of already see the pattern. Initially, the objects increase in the number of shapes as you go up or as you progress. So it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one should be a 5 if we're continuing on with the pattern. And then you can see straight after the 5, then it starts to decrease by 1 as you progress. So then it goes to 4 in this one, and then 3 in the next one, and then 2, and then 1. So for this object to have been correct, it would have had to have 5 shapes. And again, like we mentioned previously, don't let the split between the number of circles and the number of squares in any of the objects confuse you or distract you from the main pattern. These are just used to distract you. So this is the correct answer. For question 26, what we can see from our quick glance is that in every single object, there is essentially 3 triangles. So you have the larger triangle, then you have a middle triangle inside, and then you have a smaller triangle inside. So every single object has these 3 triangles. The one thing that seems to be changing within the triangles is which area is shaded or colored black. So this is what's going to give us our rule and what's going to help us identify the odd one out. And immediately what I wanted to do is see, like, this is the middle area that's been shaded, then this is the inner area that's been shaded, then that's the inner area being shaded, to try and find a rule or a pattern. But then I noticed that one of them does not have any shading at all. So we can assume that this is going to be our answer. Like I say, we can check to see if there's a pattern in terms of which area is shaded. But as soon as we see this one that has no shading versus all the others have at least some sort of shading, then we know that the rule is going to be that any area needs to be shaded, and which area it is going to be random. So the one that doesn't have any shading or doesn't have any black is the one that doesn't fit the rule, or the odd one out. And so this is our answer, this one here. Moving on to question 27. This one seems to be a little bit more challenging once you have the first glance. It's not straightforward what's happening. What's clear is that every single object has some circles inside. You have two layers. You have an upper layer and then you have a lower layer. And then you also have some of the circles shaded in black, and then others are shaded in white, or not shaded and are white. So let's try to see how we can get to the answer. Each object has different number of circles. So we can try to solve in terms of quantity, in terms of the coloring or the shading, and these are going to, or positioning. So these are going to be, our main three areas that we can focus on. So if we focus on quantity, let's see if that will give us our solution. So here we have, on the first object, we have 3 circles, then we have 5, then we have 4, then we have 3, then we have 5 again, then we have 3. Already I can tell you that we're not really seeing any trends or patterns, so this is unlikely going to be how we're going to solve this. So let's focus on something else, and just to see, as you can see, 3, 5, 4, 3, 5, 3, 5, 4, 4. There's no clear trend or pattern in terms of trying to identify the odd one out. The number of circles in each object seems to be random, so we can ignore that for now. Let's see what's happening with the circles that are shaded versus the ones that are not shaded. So you can see here the shaded or the black circles are on top. Here the black circles are on bottom, and then here on the third object the black circles are on top. So now we're starting to see some sort of trend or some sort of pattern. Let's continue to see if that continues. Here you have the black circles on bottom. Here you have the black circles at the bottom. So if our pattern is true, then we expect the circles here to be on top, or the black circles here to be on top. But let us continue to see if that is indeed correct. So if the black circles were on top, then here they would need to be on bottom. So this one's good. The next one, the circles should be on top, and then on bottom, and then on the top. So we can see that this is going to be our pattern or our rule, and the only one that's not complying with this rule is this one, where the black circles are at the bottom and the white circles are at the top, when it should be the other way around for it to be true. So this is the one that doesn't fit the rule, and this is our answer. So for question 28, we've already done an example like this earlier on in this video, but let's just go through this one anyway to see if it's going to give us a similar kind of answer. And what you can see, in all of the objects you have 5 lines, and one of those lines is broken or has a gap. Let's see what happens with that line as we move from one object to another. So you can see from the beginning that the line with the gap, or the broken line, is moving up 1 level each time. So it's moving up again here, and then it moves up here again, and then moves up here again, and then here it's supposed to be moving up, but it seems to have gone down. So already this one is being flagged. So this is our potential answer, but let's continue to make sure that is indeed correct. So the broken line, or the line with the gap, should have been at the top, as it increases by 1 each time. And then let's see what happens as we continue. So it seems like, and from this point on, the line starts to drop by 1 each time. And as you can see, it is dropped by 1 here, and then it dropped again by 1 here, and then it dropped again and again. So we've identified the rule. the rule is that the broken line or the line with the gap increases by 1 all the way from the bottom to the top, and then as we reach the top, it starts to come down again. So that is the rule, and the only one that doesn't comply with this rule is the one that we flagged initially, which didn't fit with the rule, or we perceive not to fit with the rule, but now we've confirmed that this is indeed the case, that this broken line or the line with the gap should be at the top and not at the bottom for it to be in line with the rule. For question 29, we do the usual quick glance, and what we notice immediately is that every single object seems to have 3 circles, an outer circle, a middle circle, and then an inner circle. And then it seems also that in each of these objects, one of the areas is shaded apart from this one. So it seems that since all of them have an area shaded in black apart from this one, our rule is going to be that an area needs to be shaded, and because this one doesn't have an area shaded, then this one will be our answer. So we can select this and move on to the next one. For question 30, we have seen similar kind of examples or questions to this, but let's see if you are able to solve this one. Like we've said before, don't rely on the answers of the previous ones. Focus on this one separately and see if you're able to get the answer. We're going to give you 10 seconds, so please leave your answers in the comment section. And if you're not able to get the answer, please also let us know and we will help you get to the right answer. Okay, so for question 31, again, we start off as always with a quick glance across all 9 objects. And what we can see clearly is that every single object has 2 lines. They're all squiggly, some are longer than others and some are more squiggly than others. But I don't think that's going to be the rule or the pattern. So what we observe is actually in one of the objects is that the lines cross each other or intersect, whereas in all the other objects, they do not cross each other or intersect. So we have our answer. We're here. This is our answer. It's clear that this is the answer because the 2 lines intersect, whereas in all the other 8 objects, the lines do not intersect. Question 32. Again, as always, let's start with a quick glance and see what we have. So what we can see in all the objects are 3 different symbols, a 1, a plus sign, and an X sign. So we have a 1, a plus, and an X across these. Now we need to determine how are these shown or how are these spread out across the 9 objects. So we have a 1, a plus, and an X, 1 plus X, 1 plus plus. So I've determined what the rule is, and if it wasn't clear when I was speaking it out, let's try and do it this way. So if we segregate the 9 objects into 3 sets of 3, so we have this one, and then we have this one. Hopefully you can see that there is a pattern, and the pattern is of course a repeating pattern of 1 plus X. So you can see 1 plus X, 1 plus X, and then 1 plus, and this one should be an X, but as you can see it is not, it's a plus, and so this is going to be our shape that doesn't fit the rule because it shows a plus sign instead of an X. So by now you know what you need to do when you see the timer on the right. Basically, let's see how long it takes you to answer the question. You have 10 seconds, and as always, leave your answers in the comment section. Question 34, let's start off with a quick glance across the 9 objects. and immediately we can see that there are two shapes in diagonal positions across all the 9 objects apart from this one. So immediately our attention should be focused over here, and the key difference that we see is the positioning is different from the others, firstly, and then secondly, the two shapes intersect or cross each other, whereas in all the other objects, the shapes do not cross each other. And so we already have our answer. We can already say that this is our answer. One thing to bear in mind, there are different shapes, and sometimes the shapes might distract you, so you might start counting the number of sides. You might start wondering if these shapes are related to these shapes. But in this example, it was clear that the rule is that the two shapes should be placed diagonally and not crossing each other. And then the third object does not obey this rule, and therefore it is the answer. Question 35, we start as always with a quick glance across the 9 objects, and the first thing we notice is that the only shapes that need to be considered are essentially lines, and what we can see is in each of these objects there are 3 lines, and the length of these lines seem to be sporadic or random, so that's not going to lead us to our answer, or it's unlikely to lead us to our answer. And on continued observation, what we notice is that there is only one intersection of the lines, and that happens in the first object, where you can see 2 lines intersect or cross each other. Whereas in all the other objects, there are no intersections. All the lines are separate and do not overlap or cross each other than this one. And therefore, this leads us to conclude that this is our answer. And this is the object that doesn't fit the rule. So for question 36, you know what you need to do. You have 10 seconds. Let's see if you can get the answer. Question 37, as always, let's start with a quick glance across all 9 objects and see what's going on. So the first thing we can say is that there are 2 shapes being considered here. You have a circle and a square, and the number of each differs and seems to be increasing as we progress from the left to the right. So it seems like it's going to be a quantity pattern. So let's start by checking the total quantities in each object. And then if we are not able to conclude or get an answer or identify a pattern that can lead us to the answer, then we can dive into the details and start comparing the number of circles versus the number of squares. But for now, let's just look at the total quantities to see if that leads us to an answer. So here in the first one, we have 1 shape, then we have 2 shapes, then 3. So already we're starting to see a pattern. You can see 1, 2, 3, but this one shows as 5. So already this is flagging and disrupting the pattern that we believe we have. But let's continue to see if the pattern continues. So again, we have 5, then we have 6, then we have 7, then we have 8 shapes, and finally we have 9 shapes. So what we can see is that as we progress from the left to the right, we have a clear pattern where each object increases by 1 shape. So you can see that by the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one should have been a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so this leads us to conclude that this object here is indeed the object that doesn't fit the rule and therefore is our answer, because it is showing as 5 shapes instead of 4 shapes, and so this is our answer. Question 38, you have 10 seconds as always to try and get the answer. Let us know how quickly you were able to do it in. So for question 39, as always, we start with our quick glance, and what we notice immediately is that there are only circles to be considered. In each of the objects, there are only circles, and the only thing that seems to be changing is the quantity and the placement of those circles. So let's start off by looking at the quantities, and then if we need to drill down further into the placement or the specific placement of the circles, then we can do that. But let's start off by looking at the quantities. So as always, we start off from the left. 1, 2, 3, we already have a pattern forming or a rule potentially forming. So 3, 4, 5, 4. So here we kind of have one that goes against the rule. So this potentially could be our odd one out or the one that doesn't fit the rule. But let's continue to determine if that is indeed the case. So then we have 3, then we have 2, and then we have 2. Okay, so now that we've completed the quantities or we've completed the numbering, we can now say that this one is not the one that doesn't fit the rule. In fact, it's the last one. It's the last object that doesn't fit the rule. So what is the rule? So basically, the number of circles increases by 1 each time until we get to 5. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And then it starts to drop by 1 all the way to the end. So 5, and then we go to 4, 3, 2, and this one should be 1. So this one that is 2 should be 1, and therefore, since it's showing 2 circles, it doesn't comply with the rule, and therefore it is the one that doesn't fit the rule, and therefore it is the answer that we're looking for. Moving on to question 40, quick glance tells us immediately that what we have is essentially large square with a smaller square which is shaded in black, and that is moving position. So every single object has the large square, and this large square or the square that is white does not move place, so that's not going to help us with our rule. So then let's focus on the black square, the smaller black square which is inside the larger white square, and see its positioning to see if we can identify or if we're able to determine what the rule is going to be here. And so let's start from the left and then compare the second object with the first object. And what you can see is that the black square has shifted or moved to the left, or basically it's shifted anti-clockwise. So it's moved 90 degrees anti-clockwise. So it's gone from the top to the left, and then again from the second to the third object, the same thing has happened. The black square has shifted 90 degrees anti-clockwise, and then again in the fourth object it's shifted 90 degrees anti-clockwise. And so this is most likely going to be our rule, that the black shape or the black square shifts 90 degrees anti-clockwise each time. And so if we look at the fifth object, it's showing us that the black square has actually shifted 90 degrees clockwise. So this is different and should flag potentially being our answer. So we'll flag that for now. Let's continue just to determine. So if it had shifted 90 degrees anti-clockwise, this black square should have been on top. And then if we move to the next one, anti-clockwise 90 degrees, correct. Then the next one 90 degrees, and so on and so forth. So all the rest of the objects comply with the rule where the black shape or the black square shifts 90 degrees anti-clockwise. The only one that doesn't is this one right here, the fifth object. And since it doesn't comply with the rule, it will be our answer. So this is our answer, the fifth object. Question 41. You know what to do when you see the timer. Let us know how quickly you're able to answer this question, or if you needed help. So question 42, we can see with a quick glance that there seems to be the same shape across all 9 objects, or 2 of the same shapes across all 9 objects, one similar but inside the other. So every object has a larger square with a rectangle on the side and then a smaller version of the same shape. And then in some cases, the section or the rectangular section on the edge is shaded. So not straightforward, this one, so you need to pay attention to the details. This one is a little bit more complicated, and there are a number of different patterns or rules that you can follow that can distract you and lead you away from the answer. For example, let's look at the larger shape. Let's concentrate at the larger shape for now, and let's look at the rectangular section and how it changes from one object to the other. So we go from the first object to the second object, and we see that the rectangular section has shifted 90 degrees anti-clockwise, and then again 90 degrees anti-clockwise over here in the third object. And then on the fourth object, it hasn't moved. And then on the fifth object, it again hasn't moved. So since we have 2 objects that don't follow the rule, we know that this is not the pattern and this is just a distraction. So the positioning of the rectangular section is just a distraction. Let's do the same thing for the smaller shape inside, and we look at the smaller rectangular, and you can see from this one to this one, it's shifted again 90 degrees anti-clockwise. Then you come to the third one, and again it's shifted 90 degrees anti-clockwise. But then in the fourth shape, it doesn't change, it stays the same. And in the fifth shape, it again doesn't change or doesn't change positions, it's still the same. So again, since we have 2 objects that don't follow the rule, then we can say that again isn't the rule, and therefore that can be discounted. So let's go back to the beginning, and now let's concentrate on the shading. You can see the shading on the larger shape. We have a black rectangular section, then you have a gray rectangular section, then you have a white rectangular section. So then we have black rectangular section, then we have the gray rectangular section, and then we have a white rectangular section, and then we have a black rectangular section, and then a white section, and then another white section. So I've determined the pattern, but let's just try to make it a little bit easier to see. So again, if we split it into 3s or 3 sets of 3, that will make identifying the pattern a little bit easier. And remember, we were looking at the shading of the rectangular section. So black, gray, white are the rectangular sections in this section. And then here it's repeated, black, gray, and white. And then in the last one, it's black, white, white. So the one that doesn't fit the rule is this one, because let me just do that again. It's this one, because the rectangular section should in fact be gray and not white. So that's how we have determined the odd one out in this one. And so this is the shape that doesn't comply with the rule. So remember, black, gray, white, black, gray, white, and then black should have been gray, white. So this is the only one that doesn't comply with the rule, and therefore this is our answer. For question 43, again, we've put you a timer. This will be the last example that we're going to show. You have 10 seconds. Let's see if you can get the answer in the time frame. If not, and if you need to pause the video, please do so. But please leave your answers in the comments and let us know how long it took you. If you're not able to answer this, please also let us know, and we will help you with the solution. Okay, now let's try to summarize by recapping all the tips and tricks that we went through while answering the example questions throughout this video. If you follow these, we are sure your answers will be derived much more efficiently, helping you smash your assessment. Firstly, try to answer as many questions as possible by working quickly but also accurately, which means you should avoid guessing. Your score will be determined by the number of correct answers and deducted for incorrect answers. So, if you are not sure, it is better to move on and come back if you have the time at the end than to randomly choose an answer. Also, don't assume. Sometimes red herrings are thrown in to distract or trick the less attentive candidates, and one of the most common mistakes is assuming a pattern will continue indefinitely. Always consider alternatives and make sure the pattern is correct throughout the whole sequence. It will only take a few seconds once you get the hang of it. It is important to keep it moving. So, if you feel you are stuck or your mind goes blank, move forward, and if you have time at the end, you can always come back to it. You will be able to use the control panel to go to a specific task, and you will have the option to skip questions or go back to previous questions to change answers. But in general, it is best to avoid jumping from one question to the other. If you feel really stuck, sometimes by saying what you see out loud, the answer becomes obvious. So try to say what you see as default and get used to doing it. Pay attention to the details. Don't be fooled by the distractions and diversions, and avoid the noise, which can come in various forms, shapes, sizes, placements, and so on. Consider one element at a time and identify which is the one you need to be focused on for each question or task. There may be multiple patterns which are true for all objects and may divert your attention away from the important pattern. So be wary of these. Don't try to memorize the questions and answers you see here, even if some seem to be repeated or look familiar. Instead, focus on understanding the concept, and then you'll be able to answer any question that is thrown at you. Have a system, so follow our 5-step process, which is the glance, compare, pattern, reverse, and odd one, and you'll always be on the right track. Finally, be prepared. We've all heard the saying, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So, practice as many questions as possible in advance to build up that cognitive ability and stand out from your peers. Now that you have a much better understanding of how to solve these types of puzzles, what should you do next to do well in the assessment? Well, we have proposed and outlined a 4-step action plan that will really help you to master this test. Here, you will have all the resources you need to succeed. Number 1, make sure to go through this video tutorial thoroughly enough times until you understand the core principles and become familiar with performing the 5-step process. If anything is unclear, ask us in the comments section or reach out to us directly and we'll be more than happy to help. Number 2, be prepared. Learn useful techniques through practice and feedback. We've all heard that practice makes perfect. So, practice, practice, practice. Practice as many questions as possible. In the description, we have linked our practice e-booklet with over 100 tasks of varying difficulties, with full solutions and clear rationale explanations and very easy navigation. Put the 5-step process that you have learned here into practice and see how quickly you can go through the practice booklet and increase your confidence. There will be no doubts once you're done. Number 3, try an actual live test to give you a real insight on how the test will be and to get you more familiar and comfortable with the format. Follow through and try to answer the questions by yourself. Finally, follow the tips and tricks that we listed in the previous slide I know it may seem overwhelming right now, but I can assure you that if you follow the tips and tricks, including this 4-step action plan, and attempt the practice questions from the practice e-booklet, you will be in a much better position to smash this assessment and pass with flying colors. And that's it for this video. If you find an easier, quicker, or better way of solving any of the tasks we've solved, leave us a comment showing your method and we'll add it to the description to help others. If you have any questions or require any clarifications, we would be more than happy to help. So just let us know in the comment section. If there are any other types of tests that you would like to see covered in the same way we have done here, then just let us know. And if you have a test coming up, let us know how you do and whether this video helped. If you found this video or any of the other resources we've provided useful in any way, please let us know. We'd be very grateful for the feedback. Please like, share, and subscribe. And finally, good luck in your assessment. We know you'll smash it.